Hey there, and great to be talking to everyone today, and thanks Hannah for inviting me into the group. Looks quite a fun crowd and certainly very engaged. Yeah, my kind of background is in financial services and utilities primarily, although I was a management consultant when I was a lad for about 5 years. So I'd spent 10 years at Barclays doing what now is called um, big data, but back then was called analytics, and set up customer insight and sort of behavioral insights and all of that kind of stuff. Um, there back in the 90s actually, and did some. I mean, over a beer, I can certainly talk about some of the stuff we did, which was really quite cutting edge, even now. Um, After that, I went to Eon, where I spent another 11 years, and was responsible for introducing NPS to Eon back then, and then first of all in the UK, and then led its implementation across about 9 countries, working for the group chief executive. Um, and we went on a big transformation there, starting with transactional NPS, but then moving into customer journeys and brand level metrics, and how you manage feedback loops through all of that, and how you make it work, and that stuff at Eon has stuck. So still now, kind of 15 years later, Eon is still a big NPS house, and NPS is fully embedded into all of their senior executive metrics and business unit metrics and so on. So it worked pretty well, and based on some pretty strong foundations. And James, I think, is it's a big Qualtrics customer, I think, or it used to be. I assume it still is. Um, uh, and then after doing that across there, I then came back into the UK business and was part of the leadership team that did a massive customer-oriented transformation, which improved our kind of brand level NPS metrics by about 40 points, which was worth about 20 to 25 million pounds of value a year. So a really big experience and very formative for me personally, and the kind of the learnings from that as to how to successfully do a customer transformation have stuck with me, and to some extent I've been kind of living off and embellishing those experiences ever since. So after Eon, I was then global head of customer experience at AIG for a while, big American insurance company, and then started doing independent consulting and contracting at places like National Grid, where I am at the moment, Thames Water, Post Office for a bit. During COVID, I was at Test and Trace launching a very big NPS program again with Qualtrics, so that whenever you went to a test center and had a test, you'd get surveyed so that we could improve the experience. I then, before National Grid, I was at Aviva, where I spent a year working with their group chief marketing officer, trying to stabilize their NPS and customer metrics, because they were in a position of having a set of bonus level metrics for the board which they were missing, and they didn't understand why, and didn't have appropriate infrastructure around the metrics to be able to provide the insights that would tell them what they needed to do. And the board, unsurprisingly, were a bit pissed off that they were missing their bonuses because of this random metric that they didn't understand and didn't know what they needed to do to improve. So I spent a year kind of working through all of that with her, and putting that on a much more stable footing, so they actually understood what it was that they had to do to get their bonuses. And then, as I said, for the last couple of years, I've been at National Grid working with the customer director, the new customer director there, to set up this brand new function and actually set up the transformation program through which to make National Grid Energy Distribution, which is the people that you contact if you've got a power cut, to help them become much more customer focused. And that is a program which 2 years in is really, really beginning to build some momentum now, and is occupying pretty much my every waking hour at the moment. But all very exciting stuff because we've got an exec that's keen to do things, coupled with what's effectively a greenfield site, which is a rare combination. So anyway, so that's my background. So yeah, happy to talk about some experiences or answer questions, or however whatever works best. So as I said, most of my experience has been with NPS, but have obviously strayed into other metrics. But it's really the main learnings are how you, in my view, are how you assemble a transformation program around the metrics, but without the solid foundations of robust, understood, and insightful metrics, then you can't actually do anything. So the measurement and metrics is the foundations, but it is just the beginning, because after that it's a massive transformation program which requires kind of loads of governance, accountability, and robust executive support, commitment, and so on. But anyway, so I can talk about any or answer questions about any aspects of that as is helpful. So I'll kind of, if anyone's got questions or thoughts or areas they'd like to explore, then I'm happy to go into any details. Alternatively, I can just continue rabbiting on for as long as it's helpful.
We're all just sitting here, aren't we? Just listening and just looking at Adam. But well, I know that you've got your hand up, and I'm not being rude here, but it was Jackie ultimately that wanted to have a session around this particular subject. So if I can visit Jackie first, I mean, is that, I mean, I know that I said that we'd go round and have discussions each, but I think Adam set the scene there so well. We may as well continue on this vein. I mean, Jackie, is there anything that you would like to ask Adam?
Absolutely, but Wayne, if you want to come in first, that's fine. Why don't we hear Wayne's question, and then I'm happy to do some framing on mine as well.
I'm going to ask a question. I hope this is everyone else's problem, and I just want your thoughts on it, Adam. Too often, NPS gets used, and we go down the rabbit hole of using it as a lag metric rather than a lead metric, because everyone asks why. Why is the NPS score like that? Why is the NPS score? And you end up assessing the NPS down to minutiae of respondents. And in the end, people getting obsessed and just following the NPS, what I call the NPS rabbit hole. How do you help organizations to keep NPS as the lead metric that it's intended to be and not go down that NPS lag rabbit hole? Knowing full well, because of NPS and the way that it's measured and the way you collect it to get respondents, if you do, you actually slow down your pace of change around the customer if you go down the NPS lag metric rabbit hole. So I'm more interested about, I technically get it, but how do you encourage an organization to stop going down those rabbit holes? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's the answer that I've deployed to that question in a number of different places is to be sure that you are matching your NPS scores at whatever level, whether it's transactional or brand level or journey level, with operational data. So NPS in and of itself, in my view, is kind of helpful, but as you said, it's only ever part of the story, because you have customer verbatim, which can be helpful and informative, but it's only partial, and it doesn't necessarily make it terribly actionable. So what I would always advocate doing is making sure that when you're doing your NPS surveys, you ask for permission to match the data to your operational information so that it's not anonymous. And you can then see within your data, this customer had these operational experiences. They did this thing on this at this time, then this happened, then this happened, then this happened, and then they gave us a score of this. And that, if you do that across, all of your surveys, you then have a very robust operational data set to start analyzing. And in fact, you can also use that to predict your NPS. And I guess that's kind of where I would head with this, is I think if you can understand and model what the operational drivers of NPS are, then you're in a very strong position, because you're effectively saying, well, I now know that if a customer has this, and this experience, or it takes this long to do this thing, I predict that they're going to have a poor score. And that means you don't have to survey so many people, first of all, which is great. And secondly, it means that you can talk to your operational teams and say, if you want to get a good NPS score, the operational metrics that you need to work on are this, and this, which is a much easier conversation, or much more helpful conversation for them to have. So I think that's really, and it's actually something I've done, I think 5 or 6 in 5 or 6 different organizations, always to great effect, because people kind of, when you say, well, I don't know, in my current place, you kind of say, well, people who ask for a quote to get a new electricity connection, if they don't accept the quote, they're likely to give you a bad score. So therefore, and the reason they don't give you they don't accept quotes is because the price is too high. And the reason for that is because you're not managing their expectations around price. And it takes you into a much more operational world than in kind of market research world, if I can put it that way. And if you're lucky, and your data is good enough, you may also be able to then produce a predicted customer satisfaction or NPS score, which you can then apply across your entire customer base. And then and that suddenly becomes, oh right, we've now got an operational customer satisfaction metric, which is operational quality metrics, rather than survey quality metrics where you're limited to whatever your survey sample is. And if you think about it, the truth is that a lot of the time it is blindingly obvious when someone's had a rubbish customer experience. You ought to be able to see it in the data, and all this work does is elevate that and make it transparent that these are the people for whom this awful thing has happened. Therefore, you don't need to survey them. It's been bad, so treat them as if they've had a bad experience and just deal with it. And then, of course, in aggregate terms, that actually this operational metric, this lead time, or this failure rate, or whatever it is the thing that you need to concentrate on your backlog. And so I think, Wayne, it's a long answer, but I think that's, in my view, how you turn this into a truly leading metric, that fix these operational metrics, and your NPS scores will sort themselves out. And then once you've sorted those out, then other issues will come into focus, and your program carries on. So I hope, does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. That doom loop where our NPS ecosystem is very good, provides all that data, and therefore operational teams are now not relying on their own data, they're relying on NPS data, which has actually slowed the organization down. Because they'll just wait until the NPS data comes in before they act. Because that ecosystem's really good, really sound, really judged, and that's what the senior exec only look at. So I'm having the reverse challenge of that ecosystem does not replace your operational metrics. You still need to do your operational metrics, because that should be a lead metric to retention, repurchase.
Exactly.
Not a lag metric to how good your operation is functioning.
So in this ecosystem, have you got those links between operational and you've got all of that? And so you understand which operational metrics they've got to get after.
We've identified where there's gaps in operational metrics as well. So there are operational teams that are not governing part of the experience with day-to-day operational metrics. They're just substituting it with NPS. So yeah, we've got quite a mature ecosystem.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I worry about, is I've got areas of ownership that are under-investing in their own operational reporting and relying on the maturity of NPS to give them the answer.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I would. Yeah. Okay. Well, that as you're suggesting, that probably needs some attention, and I would be looking at, in terms of defining the metrics, I would be matching as you've done, matching the operational and research data, and then using one to predict the other and go from there. And that tells you, here's the 10 operational metrics that drive your NPS. So your executive team should be focused on those operational metrics, and then the NPS should just sort itself out.
Thank you.
That's helpful to hear. That's a great question, Wayne. So I will take the stand, if that's all right, because I did really want this conversation. And the reason I had a curiosity around it was that, to set the scene, NHS Property Services is an NPS house. It has been for 5 years. Completely bought into at board level and executive level and senior leadership team level. It sits on our corporate objectives. Everybody is targeted against it, and it's a force for good. And if you consider our position in our market, we're a government company, we're business to business, we're genuinely a function within the NHS. Some of our customers don't have choice, some do, but some of them don't have choice. And to set the broader context of our why, is that over the last 4 years, we've had a 59-point shift in our NPS, and over the last 5 years, an 82-point shift in our NPS. So we had quite a long way to go. And that embedding has been a really positive way of us, really driving up to where I believe we can be getting to top quartile in the kind of work we do with professional services, with B2B. And I guess we're at the point, and it's very interesting about that predictability, is how we now start setting meaningful predictions of where we could get to and what is a reasonable target for us to achieve, rather than more of a motivational vision that says, come on guys, we're better than this. We can at least get to a certain point. So NPS is pretty embedded with us. We've also introduced a couple of years ago customer effort and Wayne, I really look at that as quite a leading indicator along with NPS, and I always want to see my effort score ahead of my loyalty score, because if we're easy to do business with, we're likely to have more loyal customers. So effort has been a really nice dimension to add to it. We've talked about trust metrics. Is there a place for those? And how we kind of benchmark, and one of the other areas is making NPS meaningful across the workforce. So our workforce, we've got about 5,500 people. They range from a part-time domestic in a health centre through to a highly qualified town planning specialist who is working at a strategic level. So we've got, like many organisations, and certainly the energy companies that you've worked with, the Eons, you can have people in a van and people in the boardroom. We've got that range. It's helping to make NPS meaningful and motivational at different levels. So a few things were kind of on my mind about latest thoughts on metrics, what's really landing, what's driving customer improvement, what's listened to in your boards, in ours. I say on our corporate scorecard, we've got effort, we've got NPS, we've got patient satisfaction, and how we make some of that meaningful and become more front-footed about actually do this and you'll get that, rather than let's do a whole host of things and thankfully something good will fall out of the back of it. And just before I close, just to give you slightly more context, for the last 4 years, we have had a structured programme. We've invested about 2.5 million in the programme outside of the activities that fall out of that. So we've been very programmatic around how we make that 60-point shift from where we've been to where we need to get to. And now we're kind of moving into the next phase of, okay, what next? How do we become more sophisticated? And frankly, getting your view as to whether NPS is still sitting on the lips of your boards, and are we even in the past on that? So that was where some of my thoughts are.
Well, lots of questions there. But first of all, congratulations on the scale of the trend, scale of the improvement that you've made. That's wherever you started, that's still impressive to have improved by that much. So congratulations on that. On one of the questions was, how do we set our ambitions next? Have you done any benchmarking of you against other property?
Feel free to come in.
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit of benchmarking to understand what our competitors do, but the challenge is we're quite unique as well as an organisation in comparison to our competitors. So, for example, some property organisations would focus on the property side, others would focus on the facility side. We focus on all, so it's quite hard to really, draw those comparisons.
Okay. But do you want to do in industry comparisons? I mean, are there other sectors which are similar against? It depends on your kind of aspiration.
Yeah.
And
I can probably more helpfully answer that one. And the short answer, Adam and team, is yes, because as a board, we now want to be able to articulate the so what from the what. So this is our NPS. Look at how far it's grown. Yeah, but what does that really mean? And to be able to really sort of amplify that message is and compared to, and it might be we need to compare professional services versus facilities management. We might need to have a range across our service offer, but as a board, we're really keen to know benchmarks because it kind of tells where you're sitting in the pack. We've got stuff from the Institute of Customer Service that is quite helpful because there's government and public services in there as well. But yeah, even at the board meeting this week, it was like on a number of metrics, not just our customer ones. It was like, how do we know we're comparing with others? What is our comparison? So it's on the lips.
Yeah. Okay. Because that's what I've used in the past to do that. And actually, if you can get it robust at an executive level, the targets that I've set are about performance relative to competitors.
Yeah.
So absolute score becomes irrelevant. It is then actually it's where are you relative to your peers, and that's because that's frankly the thing that drives value.
Yeah.
Because if your customers have a choice between you versus your peers, then NPS is likely to be in the mix of things that they will consider. I mean, not numerically, but just their perception of that. And so understanding their perceptions of your competitors is a big driver of your potential revenue growth. And so there's, if you talk to Bain, they have lots of evidence of, if you are if you're in the top 1 or 2 in your industry, you do for NPS, you will gain market share and value. And so it is a set of metrics that are interesting. Another question you asked was about NPS, and is that still the right metric, and so on. I honestly don't really care. In my experience, whenever I've used or had access to different metrics in the same place, whether it's effort score or customer satisfaction or NPS, they're all incredibly correlated. If someone's pissed off, they will be pissed off in whatever survey you give them, and if they're happy, they'll be happy in whatever. And that it's much. Now, I'm sure there are examples where that isn't the case, and people will say, well, it wasn't, or effort score is great or whatever. But you should consider whether the question makes sense to the customers in the context that they're being asked it. So, for instance, in National Grid, where I am at the moment, if you ask people, would you recommend this service? Well, I don't have any choice. You're a monopoly. So it's not necessarily a good question.
So Adam, can I just ask you, have you reframed that question still get a sort of an NPS metric that comes out of it, but just articulated in a way that's a bit more meaningful to the customer completing it?
Well, two answers to that question. Actually, in National Grid, we don't have a choice because Ofgem incentive, provides incentives around a customer satisfaction question. So they've decided to find the question. But actually, in Eon, when we were implementing the NPS program for our DNO businesses, so that the monopolistic businesses, we did adapt the question and we asked whether people would recommend the experience they've just had,
right,
rather than whether they would recommend Eon specifically. So yes, adapted the question slightly. Yeah, but again, you're really just so long as you don't get customers coming back to you and saying, well, you're a monopoly, how can't, which is just tedious and unhelpful. So you want to kind of reduce that as much as possible, so adapt the question. But as I said, if someone's pissed off, they'll tell you they're pissed off, whatever metric you give them. And if they're really thrilled, they'll probably express their level of being thrilled. So there are academics that would argue with that, but that's been my experience, and that whatever you do and you draw graphs to look at the difference, it's also correlated.
Could I just interject, as Nick's had his hand up now for just a little while?
Yeah, as an interim, unfortunately, I see too often most businesses and organisations' main performance metric is the P&L, which is always a nice battle to join, but it's obviously then takes a lot of effort to demonstrate that actually isn't the only decent measurement. But fundamentally, I remember the early days of NPS and the naysayers then claiming about the way it could be changed to suit. And what I mean there is that if we take a typical "do you recommend" question with a score of 1 to 10, where your promoters are maybe 9 and 10 and your detractors are maybe 5 and less, and then the neutrals are removed, it can be manipulated. So some companies and organizations maybe use 8, 9, 10 for promoters and 3, 2, 1 for detractors. I was just looking at your view where you are at the moment, where you've been operating in the establishment of the actual NPS mechanics, as opposed to the actual output.
So I have always stuck with it as it is. So yeah, 9s and 10s promoters, 0 to 6 detractors, and because it has, in my experience, always rung true. So to your point about how do you try and break through the P&L focus, the kind of loyalty economics analysis of that is completely critical, which is we observe that 9s and 10s do stick with us and buy more and all of that, and not detractors leave us at much greater levels and don't buy more and so on. And so having the conversation with your finance team about what is the relative value of these types of customers, and in my view, getting the finance team to do that analysis so that they believe it is a critical step, so that you try, if you possibly can, to get the finance director to have the conversation with the exec to convince them, rather than someone from the customer team. If you can do that, brilliant. It can be a tough conversation with the finance team. I'm aware only too clearly. So, but once you've done that kind of analysis, if you then look at what is the relative value of customers giving different NPS scores, by and large, it has stacked up in my experience. The one thing I would say, the one kind of area where I do sometimes depart, is that I introduce a category called severe detractors, because in my experience, people who score 0 to 4 are generally really significantly less valuable than 5s and 6s. So you could, so I kind of have from time to time tracked severe detractors, because often 5s and 6s are quite close to 7s and 8s, but you do see big jumps to 9s and 10s in value, and particularly 10s. So I think, you know, if you're trying to aim for things, then really it's 10s where you get that big step change in value. So I think there's room for subtlety in there, but I've generally stuck with it because, you know, don't muddy the waters too much unless there's a really strong reason to do so. And of course, the other point hidden in what you're saying is it's very difficult to compare your NPS score to someone else's NPS score unless you've done it yourself in the same benchmarking survey, because you have no idea how they've done it, how they, you know, their survey mechanics, let alone what they've done with the actual scores. Does that help, Nick? Does that answer that?
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Adam,
Yeah.
I was just intrigued to get your view on you know, do you buy into linking NPS to reward and recognition, and what have you seen that works, and those terrible stories where it doesn't work or maybe changed as a result of doing that?
Yeah, you have to be so very careful. I think it works well, or can work well, at an exec level, but at the front line, you are incredibly open to gaming, and that's the, you know, people, you know, if you provide any incentive, people will seek to maximize it however they can, and that will generally involve gaming of some sort. So you just have to be really careful that your measurement system is robust and is completely separate from manipulation by the people who are being incentivized. So you need to watch out for that. You also, and you know, this is the same for any metric, but if you're giving them incentives around it, they need to feel in control of it, and they need to have the information with which to be able to understand what they need to do to improve. And you also have to do it at the right time. So you need to have a metric delivered and embedded and understood and accepted, and then maybe you can turn it into a performance metric. I think if you're trying to, you know, you're saying, here's a new metric, it's driving your bonus now, people will just say, well, you know, what the fuck, you know, I you know, where's this come from? I'm not in control of this. I don't believe the metric. Yeah, you know, all of the usual things come through. So you have to hit all of those before it becomes an incentive. So it's a trusted, agreed and accepted metric before you implement it as something that's going to drive what they're paid on. Otherwise, they will be cynical about it and seek to game it. You know, and you know, we've all, I'm sure, had kind of car dealership experiences where they say, "Please give me 10 out of 10 because," you know, and you know, it just puts everyone off and creates a poorer customer experience. And from the center, it means that your you know, the insights that you get from it are wholly distorted by who's the best gamer, to be honest. So many pitfalls, but any metric is the same, but these ones are just slightly more open to that. So tread carefully, I think, but certainly at an exec level, I think it's quite interesting, particularly when it's benchmarked and you're saying, you know, how are you doing versus the competition. I think that's quite interesting because that is a genuine value driver for them, but tough to get them to agree to that.
No, that makes sense. Thanks for that.
I have a question, Adam. I'm interested in, obviously, you know, when you've got these 9s and 10s sort of promoters, how you engage with them better to help them become ambassadors of your brand. Do you know what I mean? And actually utilising that insight to help drive that. Do you know what I mean? So really interesting. We have a really high NPS score. Our Trustpilot is okay, but it's not as reflective. The two don't correlate. Do you know what I mean? So we get lots of very good promoters when we're doing NPS, but actually don't seem to want to go on Trustpilot. What we get on Trustpilot is the complaints, do you know what I mean, which drags the score down. So I'm interested in how I maximise and harness those customers. Do you know what I mean? Those customers that are promoting us and saying, yep, we're really great, to help us spread the word and increase brand awareness and all of that. So I feel like that's the second part of it, because it's great as a metric, but not, I need to do something with it.
If ever there was a measurement system that was open to gaming, it's Trustpilot. So are you doing anything to manage your Trustpilot score?
Well, we do. We have agents that will respond on it and do all of that, but not.
That's not what I mean. So what you can do with Trustpilot is put a link to Trustpilot on the bottom of communications that go to customers that you know are going to be happy. So, for instance, if you're an insurance company, you put a Trustpilot link on the bottom of the communication, which tells them about their payout, their insurance. So, when they get their check, they are going to be happy. Here's a link to Trustpilot. Oh, blow me if you don't get good scores. So organizations.
Yeah, we're not gaming the system, right, at the moment. Yeah, so definitely not.
So if you've got 9s and 10s and you know who they are and you can predict when they're going to be 9s and 10s, then if Trustpilot is an important metric to you, then stick a link to Trustpilot on the bottom of those emails and your score will improve.
I mean, it doesn't feel an important score to me, right, at the time, but when I'm compared against other peers in board conversations, it becomes an interesting conversation. Do you know what I mean? So it's more just how I maybe game.
Yeah. So those organizations
game it, doesn't it? It just feels wrong.
Yeah. But those organizations that have really strong Trustpilot scores are managing their Trustpilot score because it's important to them, and because they see it as a source of new revenue or or trust or whatever. But just be aware that you can manage your Trustpilot score. You may have to pay Trustpilot some money to be able to do some of that stuff, but there are routes through doing it. So yeah, it's a funny game, that one. But if it's an important metric for you and you believe that your customers are looking at Trustpilot scores as a source of decision, as an input to their decision on whether to buy from you or not, you should be managing it.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Jackie, you had your hand up there. Did you
Well, I was just going to come in to help on that question. I think actually that Anita, I think in your boots, I would be trying to understand why that metric is so important to the board if it's one that is so easily gamed and that you can see something more valuable. But Adam came in with the answer that actually if it is a determinant of future revenue and it is where your customers look, then you've got to do something about that. But I think I share your view of feels like you might be chasing the wrong metric on that one, unless it is the decision maker for your customers, in which case you've got to look at that.
I don't think it is. I think I'm okay doing what I'm doing. I think we can improve that a little bit. Where I focus is on the other metrics. So, I mean, I don't want to get caught up in the outside world looking at that, sort of drive the wrong behaviours and the wrong decisions internally.
And as long as your board is supporting you with that, then that sounds like you're doing the right thing for me.
I mean, I was working at a large insurance company that I mentioned earlier, and they wanted to use their Trustpilot scores in above the line advertising, and therefore they needed to get a better score, and therefore they did what they did, and but you know, they knew what they were doing, and there were some people whose job it was to manage that. And lo and behold, the score improved, and that was great. But you know, I think customers probably do use it as a gauge of the value, you know, because they don't understand how it works and what Trustpilot's revenue model is. So you know, you just have to take a view on the importance of that metric for you. Jackie, I'm conscious that there might be other things that you're particularly focused on.
I think, and I mean, we just wanted to throw the pebble into the conversation.
Yeah.
Frank, we've got loads of our curious questions, but Annette's got one, so maybe you could bring her in.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. Just building on that, I mean, there's a little bit of irony, isn't there, around gaming a trust score in the first instance. I'm just interested, obviously, aside from Trustpilot, are other organisations focusing on trust now as a metric? And you know, is it something, Adam, that you've had experience of in any of your former roles?
We've thought about it, and certainly had trust as an outcome that we wanted it, but we always used NPS. I've always used, you know, because again, coming back to these things are heavily correlated, and if someone's going to recommend you, then presumably they trust you, because why would they, you know, so I'm not sure you could put a cigarette paper between trust and NPS, to be honest. But I'm open to, you know, a discussion about that, or to be challenged. Yeah, but again, it's not the metric that matters. It's how you use it, and what actions you take. That's the fundamentals.
Thank you.
Nick, you.
Yeah, just to sort of the flip side of targeting Trustpilot at the upper end is, I was with an organisation that we actually outbounded the detractors level, specifically the really, really bad ones.
Yeah.
What was quite interesting is that there was a certain percentage of those responders that actually then admitted they pressed the wrong button. They gave the wrong score in error. So a 3 rather they actually meant to give a 7. I mean, how true some of that was. But it also helped us as an organisation to identify some trends within. It was with a large retail organisation that was mis-selling products, and it allowed us to focus in on 2 specific areas. One being mobile phone and contracts was, and it's very much about transactional, is renewals and renewal dates. So, for example, when you change the contract, the first month billing is actually prorated across. So when we surveyed too early, everyone was really happy because all they were looking at was a nice shiny phone, thinking how great that was. And then they got the bill. And because it hadn't been explained to them, it generated large amounts of complaints, dissent, whatever. So by changing the sales process directly from that feedback, and also then changing the survey date or timing, we actually then gained about a 5 to 10 percentage point increase immediately. So combined with people pressing the wrong button or giving the wrong score and something like that, we took around about a 20% increase in our score because of just some very simple fundamental issues. So it was worth spending the time and money in outbounding the detractor level to generate improvement as much as,
I mean, I would regard that as a fundamental piece of an NPS program, is to get the people that were responsible for delivering that experience to be contacting the customers to understand why they did what they did. I mean, that's a fundamental, I think. Tough to get people to do it, and they don't like it, but it's really, really important. Yeah, and immensely valuable, because they'll tell you what you need to do. Tim.
Adam, I was just going to ask about the broader palette of metrics that you might deploy alongside NPS as part of a sort of balanced scorecard, inputs and outputs, that you've seen work in terms of maybe some
Mm.
employee metrics, some financial metrics. We've briefly talked about operational metrics, and we've mainly focused on customer.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, yeah. So employee NPS or employee satisfaction, whatever, all of that is really important because, it's a truism that unhappy colleagues don't make happy customers. And indeed, I have done those correlations and proven that in several places. So you have to focus on making your employees happy, otherwise you're wasting your time, honestly. And so that's a big part of this whole thing. Beyond that, we're all in this to make money. So the revenue and profit is obviously important. But I would come back to the conversation earlier in terms of what are the key operational metrics which we know are drivers of your customer outcomes, and make sure that you're looking at those so that you're operationally looking at the drivers of customer satisfaction or recommendation, and then you've got your NPS or satisfaction or whatever it is there, as well as the output from that. So I think, yeah. The other thing I would say, and kind of linked to the employee NPS, is what I've called kind of internal NPS, which is, would you recommend IT? Would you recommend HR? Would you recommend procurement? And having a program of activity at the most senior levels of the organization, where you talk to the top few hundred people in the organization and get them to fill in a survey about whether they feel supported by IT or procurement or whatever. And that I think is a significant part of the jigsaw, and can have massive impact. So in Eon years ago, we had a conversation at our group advisory board, so the top board in the company, and we had one slide, which was the NPS score of each of the support functions globally, based upon the responses from all the senior executives in the organization. And it gave the IT function a score of -80. And that changed the IT strategy. One slide and a conversation, and the IT strategy moved away from cost reductions to value added, and immensely powerful, providing you have the conversation in the right place.
Mm-hmm. Great story. I think that's really, really powerful, isn't it? Mm-hmm. It's that balanced scorecard of metrics, isn't it? Having an employee dimension, having a customer dimension, a financial dimension, and an operational dimension, and building that all into one overarching piece. I think that's where I've seen a massive step change and transformation.
Yeah, also, and then to that last story, it's whether the people in frontline operations feel supported by the support functions or not. Yeah. Because if they don't, then we're not all on the same team. Jackie, sorry.
I suspect we're pretty much out of time. The other area I was interested in everyone's perspective on was participation levels. So we want to be sure that we as a board want to be sure that the metrics we're reporting are representative of our customer base, and that's across whether it's an operational compliance performance in it. Have we got 98% compliance? Yes, therefore we know that it's a good representation of our performance. So where it comes to customer metrics, what's other people's thoughts about what is a good robust sample that gives you the confidence that the number you're reporting is representative of the customers you have?
Well, my perspective is what you can get, but in some organizations you kind of see 1% response rates, and I would say that is not valid.
No.
This is another reason why I'm increasingly an advocate for predicting NPS rather than relying on survey metrics. So if you just want to get a sample from which to do prediction, you can spend more money on getting a good response rate so you get your block of however many thousand responses. Sorry, that's in a consumer world, may not be in a B2B world, but a big block of responses from which you can use to do your modeling. And then once you're happy with your model, then you can put that across your entire customer base, and you don't have to worry about statistical validity. So I think, having over the course of my career launched millions of surveys and seen response rates decline over time, one has to question how much longer that kind of approach is going to continue. Now, if you're still getting response rates, of kind of 20-25% because you're asking questions at the right moment about a moment of truth, then that's fab. But if you're getting response rates less than 5%, you have to kind of question whether what you're getting is representative. So it's a tough one. We have fouled our own nest to some extent on this whole survey thing.